Maybe you're new to the construction industry, or maybe you've got some experience but have never been formally safety trained. This program is designed to orientate you on some construction safety basics that can keep you from getting hurt on the job. Hello, my name is Bob Sennett. On the job site, my nickname is Safety Bob. I've been a construction safety professional for over 25 years. I've seen many improvements over the years. Unfortunately, one constant remains. New or inexperienced workers, maybe workers like you, still get hurt on the job too often. A study I conducted for a large construction company pointed out that workers with less than 6 weeks of time on the job accounted for 4 out of every 10 of that company's accidents. So let's talk safety training. But before I start, let me make 2 important points. Point number 1, your job is dangerous. Nearly 1,200 construction workers were killed on the job last year. That averages to nearly 5 workers killed every business day. And point number 2, you are the person most responsible for your safety. Not your company, not OSHA, not even your supervisor. They can all help you to work safely, but always remember, you are most responsible for your safety. And you could be careless too. Over 8 out of 10 accidents are the fault of employee error. So think before you act. Don't take that shortcut, or you may be one of the 5 workers who don't go home today. I can't go over all the OSHA rules in this program, but I will discuss the main points in the key areas of construction where most workers are hurt or even killed. And the first area I'll discuss is personal protective equipment, or PPE. Following PPE rules is far more important than you might think. First, of course, it's for your protection. But wearing or not wearing your personal protective equipment can also set the tone for others to do the same. And on the construction site, PPE starts with hard hats. Your hard hat protects you from head injuries. You should wear it at all times on the site. And the same is true for safety glasses. They protect your most precious sense, your sense of sight. Why countless workers neglect to use their safety glasses, I don't know. But all too often it leads to tragedy. Every year there are over 300,000 workers who injure their eyes on the job. And many of those injuries change a worker's life. Wear your hard hat. Wear your safety glasses. Wear them all the time on the job site. If you have to go back to the trailer or the truck, or even ask your foreman, do it. Your protection and even your future livelihood may depend on using your PPE. I've talked about hard hats and safety glasses, but there are many other types of PPE that you might need depending on your work. They include steel-toed boots, dust masks and respirators, face shields, hearing protection, work gloves, and many more. Wear your PPE every time you need to wear it. Do it right, do it safely, and let your PPE protect you all the time. Now let's shift gears and talk about staying safe below ground. Of course, I'm referring to excavation and trenching safety. First and foremost, soil type knowledge is the real key. That knowledge allows even the novice worker the ability to work safely in a trench or excavation. So let's talk about soil types. OSHA rates soil types from the most stable to the least. The most stable soil is called Type A. Type A soils are so solid and stable that if you performed what's called a thumb penetration test and pressed your thumb into a Type A trench or excavation, you could barely dent the trench wall. Type B soil is next in line in terms of stability. A thumb penetration test here would allow you to slightly indent a Type B trench. And finally, the least stable and most dangerous soil is Type C soil, where that same test would allow you to press your finger freely into a Type C trench or excavation wall. And water also affects soil type determination, because whenever water is present, it downgrades the soil, making any type soil less stable. Once the soil type's been determined, protection methods of your trench or excavation can be decided. Protection methods include sloping back the soil. And how you slope back the soil is based on the type of soil. Type A soil must be sloped back at least on a ratio of 3/4 to 1. That's 3/4 of a foot back on each side of the trench for every 1 foot deep. Type B must be sloped back on a 1-to-1 ratio, and Type C, which is the least stable, must be sloped back on a 1.5-to-1 ratio, so there's no chance of cave-in. On areas where there's no room to slope back, you must use a trench box or some type of shoring or bracing. Protection should always be your first consideration, no matter the soil or the depth. When a trench is unsafe, get out quickly, just like this employee, because cave-ins happen fast and the results are usually deadly. Let me give you an example. This accident occurred in South Carolina. A worker was in an unsloped trench that was less than 3 feet deep. He had laid face down to work on a pipe in the trench. Suddenly the walls of both sides of the trench collapsed and buried him face down on his belly. The 2 workers near him tried frantically to dig him out. And he had a pulse when he was pulled from the trench, but he was gone before the ambulance arrived. Buried, suffocated, and killed in a trench less than 3 feet deep. Don't kid yourself. It can happen to you. Let's recap. First, inspect your trenches and excavations. If there's a danger of cave-in, get out now and get the other workers out too. And second, make sure excavations and trenches are protected. An average cubic yard of dirt weighs over 2,000 pounds, so if a cave-in happens, that dirt delivers a crushing blow. Whether you slope it, shore it, brace it, or use a trench box, do something. Make sure your trenches and excavations are safe. Do it right, do it safely, or your trench might become an early grave. Now let's change the subject and talk about an item that's used on job sites everywhere: ladders. Ladders are used every day, but unfortunately they're often misused, and the results can be deadly. Over 300 construction workers are killed every year from falls off ladders, and most have something in common. Most were taking a shortcut. So let's talk ladder safety basics. First, always inspect a ladder before using it. If the ladder has any broken parts, a missing rung, or if it's bent or damaged in any way, don't use that ladder. Next, when setting up a ladder, make sure it's level and stable before you climb. If you're using a step ladder, open the ladder up, locking the arms in place. And don't use a step ladder leaned up against a wall. It could kick out. If you're using a straight or extension ladder, after placing it, climb to the top and tie it off. And extend the ladder 3 feet above the upper landing, which makes getting on and off much easier and safer. Always climb ladders face first with 3 points of contact on the ladder at all times. Your 2 arms and 2 legs are your 4 points of contact. So when climbing a ladder, 3 of those 4 should always be in contact with the ladder. And always use the right ladder for the job. If you need an 8-foot step ladder, don't use a 6-foot step ladder. Don't stand on the top 2 steps of a step ladder. It's not allowed and certainly not safe. Don't do it, not even for a moment. Ladder safety is not difficult. What's difficult is recovering after a fall from a ladder. Let's recap the important ladder safety points. Inspect your ladder before you use it. Use only a ladder if it's in good condition. Always use the right ladder for the job. Tie off your straight and extension ladders and make sure they extend 3 feet above the upper landing. And finally, don't take chances on ladders. Chances like climbing with too much material in your hands, or working off the top of a step ladder, or leaning out too far to the side of the ladder. Do it right, do it safely, and live to climb that ladder another day. Now let's shift the discussion to talk about another elevated surface: scaffolding. First, remember, anytime you're constructing or tearing down a scaffold, that work must be supervised by a qualified person. Scaffolds need to be strong and steady, so if scaffold boards are bending or bowing, then it's probably overloaded and maybe unsafe. Scaffolding needs to be level and stable, with poles placed on base plates, mud sills, or adequate firm foundation. All scaffolding sections must be pinned with all braces in place before work is started, and this one's real important. all scaffold work platforms must be fully decked. That means anywhere a worker is standing or doing any work on a scaffold, that area must be fully decked. You can't climb the cross braces. You've got to use some sort of ladder. Many scaffold systems have ladders built in, but if they don't, use a tied-off extension ladder to access your work area. But let's talk about where most scaffolding safety violations and accidents occur, and that's the lack of fall protection. Any scaffold above 10 feet high needs fall protection. Most companies use guardrails and midrails, but remember, all open areas must be protected, even those areas where you load or unload materials. Also, you can't stand on block or brick or even a step ladder while on a scaffold, nor can you stand on a rolling scaffold unless the wheels are locked. Let's recap the important points. Scaffolds should be set up properly, including base plates, mud sills, pins, cross braces, and all work areas must be fully decked. Scaffolds need proper ladder access. Scaffolding over 10 feet high must have fall protection. This usually means guardrails and midrails. And lastly, don't take chances working on scaffolds, whether it's climbing the X-braces, ignoring the need for fall protection, or letting your buddy roll you while you're standing on a rolling scaffold. These are shortcuts that can get you hurt or worse. Do it right, do it safely, and make sure your scaffolds are as safe as the ground below your feet. Now let's move from scaffolds and talk specifically about fall protection that's used elsewhere on the job site. Fall protection is needed in most cases wherever a worker can fall 6 feet or more. But you've got to make the distinction. We're not talking about aerial lifts, ladders, scaffolding, or steel erection. They all have separate fall protection rules. And there are several different types of fall protection, but 3 are most widely used. And they include guardrails and midrails, usually placed on an outer edge. They have to be strong enough to keep you from falling. Personal fall protection, which includes a harness, lanyard, and a suitable tie-off point. Personal fall protection is needed in areas where other fall protection can't be used. But wearing it doesn't do you any good if you don't tie off. And tie-off points need to be strong. Each tie-off point must be able to hold 5,000 pounds per employee. And 5,000 pounds is the weight of a small truck. And finally, warning lines, used to keep workers a safe distance from fall hazards and should be at least 6 feet away from the hazards. But keep in mind, warning lines are useless if a worker goes outside the line and is not tied off. In reality, fall protection is quite simple. If you're working in an area where you can fall 6 feet or more, like outside these warning lines, you need some type of fall protection. Now let's recap. First, you've got to know when fall protection is necessary. Next, you've got to know what fall protection is best for your job. And lastly, you've got to know how to use fall protection properly, especially in personal fall protection. Know how to wear your full body harness and tie off every time you need to. And I don't want to hear that tired excuse that there's nothing to tie off to. Figure it out before you start work, because falls on construction sites kill more workers than any other type of accident. So do it right, do it safely, and protect yourself from falls every time you need to. Electrical power. It's called the silent killer. On the job site, electrical power is almost always required and all too often misused. Making matters worse, most new workers don't have any appreciation for the kind of injury that an electrical shock can deliver. So let's talk about electrical safety, and I'll focus on how and where you'll come into contact with electrical power on the job site. First, all job site electrical power needs to be grounded and protected with ground fault circuit interrupters, called GFCIs for short. An example would be any temporary panels you use. Panels should have protected covers, and be careful. Openings around the edges might expose you to energized electrical parts, especially dangerous if you're carrying tools or materials. And if you see open spaces in a panel box, stay clear. Panels should have circuits in place or socket covers where a circuit is missing. Now let's talk about how most of us get electrical power on the job site, through extension cords. First, extension cords must be rated heavy duty and in good condition. And taped or spliced extension cords are not in good condition. They should be replaced. Extension cords also need a ground prong. A cord lacking a ground is one of the most common violations I find. So remember, if the extension cord you're about to use doesn't have a ground prong, don't use it. And cords on the job site need to be located where they won't get damaged. Don't stretch a cord across a site road unless it's protected. Also, be careful stretching cords around corners, through doorways, setting them down in water, and don't make your cord a trip hazard, especially on or near any stairs. Now let's discuss the site electrical room. These rooms should be kept locked, with only electrical workers and supervisory employees allowed in, and the doors should always have warning labels. Most of you have no business being in these rooms, so don't go in. Especially don't use these rooms for storage. It's an invitation for disaster. My last point involves power lines. It's critical you keep at least a 10-foot clearance from any power lines with any tools, equipment, or materials you're using. Let me discuss a power lines accident to give you an example. A contractor was restoring a building and attached were powerful electrical lines. The work was nearly complete. All that was left was to clean the building, and those workers were using an aerial lift. They were safety trained and repeatedly instructed to stay at least 10 feet away from the power lines. One of the workers made a huge mistake, and when he raised his spray wand, he touched the power line. He was blessed, however, as the wand handle immediately broke off when hit by 4,800 volts of electricity, and he lived. But count him as one of the lucky ones. Power that strong should have killed him. And he's lucky for a second reason as well, because now I'm quite sure he has an appreciation for electrical power. And that should be your goal, to gain that appreciation, but gain it the easy way, through your training. Otherwise, you might not get a second chance. So let's recap electrical safety. If your extension cord lacks a ground or is damaged, replace it. Make sure all electrical panels and circuits are grounded and protected. If you have no business in an electrical room, stay out. And lastly, stay clear of power lines. Keep at least a 10-foot clearance, no exceptions. Do it right, do it safely, and don't be shocked by the silent killer. The last topics I'll discuss concern general safety items. Items like working with your tools, the importance of housekeeping, proper lifting techniques, working on or around heavy equipment, and some other general safety items. Let's start with your tools. Always inspect your tools before you use them. If they're not in good condition, don't use them. Either throw them out or tag them out of service until the tool can be fixed. Next, safety and housekeeping go hand in hand. Whether it's eliminating trip hazards or fire hazards, pounding down nails, or just a way to stay better organized, your clean job will not only be safer, but far more productive. And no orientation would be complete without discussing proper lifting techniques, as thousands of workers still injure their backs every year. Back injuries usually happen because many instinctively lift with their backs and not with their legs, day after day. And after lifting wrongly hundreds, maybe even thousands of times, the back finally gives way. So the most important thing I can tell you about lifting isn't how to lift properly, because most of you know that, but for you to remember to lift properly each and every time you pick something up. Back injuries cause real pain and can change your life. Lift with your legs, not with your back. If your job is to operate heavy equipment, you need to be trained and authorized by your company. And before using that equipment each day, make sure it's in good condition. That includes the tires, brakes, other mechanical items, and most heavy equipment also requires a fire extinguisher, a working horn, and a backup alarm. And be careful climbing up and down into your equipment. This type of accident is the most common accident suffered by equipment operators. But the most important heavy equipment safety rule is use your seatbelt each and every time you use that equipment. And seatbelt use, or the lack of it, has been a thorn in the construction industry's side for many years. And it's not just heavy equipment. Believe it or not, the most expensive type of accident suffered by construction workers are vehicle crashes. They're the most expensive because construction workers spend a lot of time driving company trucks, and many don't wear their seatbelts. And the lack of seatbelt use is a big problem off the job site as well. Wear your seatbelt. Wear it whether you're on the job or off. It's a surefire way to add years to your life. Stay alive. Wear your seatbelt each and every time you drive. So there you have it. I've talked about PPE, excavation and trenching, ladders, fall protection, scaffolding, electrical safety, and a number of other general safety items. But our orientation isn't complete without talking about the one thing that can keep you safe more than any other, and that's your attitude. Because despite the dangers and despite the injuries and deaths the construction industry has had, construction workers can work safely. Forget about the excuses like I'm in a hurry, or I've always done it that way before, or my personal favorite, give me 5 minutes to get this job done and then I'll work safe. Excuses will only get you hurt. Remember, working safely depends on your attitude, and a positive attitude can save you from injury or worse. With that positive attitude and knowledge of the hazards around you, you can make the job site a safer place. Do it right, do it safely, and go home healthy and whole each and every day. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.